Hello. So today we'll be doing human reproduction, and this is part four of the series. So last time we looked at normal reproduction, so reproduction among vertebrates. So now we're gonna look at reproduction specifically dealing with humans, right? So so all of this we know basically that organisms, basically the reason why they reproduce is so that they are not extinct, right? So to ensure the survival of the species, right? That's why we reproduce. So even us as humans, we reproduce because the human species um has to survive, basically. That's why we reproduce. And then all of our body cells, so our body cells, basically every body cell, it's called a somatic cell, right? And they are diploid, right? You know that diploid, that's because they have two sets of chromosomes, right? And then of course these cells, these diploid cells, like they multiply via mitosis, right? um However, there are other cells called gametes, right? Gametes are those cells that are produced via meiosis. Remember when you did meiosis, and as a result, they are haploid, they are not diploid, right? Meaning they only have one set of chromosomes, which in the case of humans, it will be 23, right? However, for these somatic cells, it will be 46, right? And then what happens is that the reason why this haploid has half the number of chromosomes than the diploid cell, right? So the body cell. The reason for that is because during fertilization, when these two join, these two gametes, right? So gametes is just sex cells, right? These two sex cells, whether so a sperm is a sex cell and an egg is a sex cell, right? So when they join, they fuse, they become a zygote via a process called fertilization, right? And then that zygote will divide, right? Using a process called mitosis, right? To form a human, meaning to grow, right? So that's basically the basics of why there's reproduction, right? And then we start with basically the first type of reproduction. So the first type of human reproduction. So you will see with human reproduction, the focus here will be on the female reproductive system, because the male reproductive system is relatively easy, right? And you will even see when you go to fertilization, um, not fertilization, I mean, when you go to puberty, that it's more focused like on the female, because basically the female is the one that's responsible for um, most processes in reproduction. So the male is just there to initiate. But in terms of nurturing and the actual reproduction, it's mostly female oriented. So the first thing we do before we look at a system, how a system operates, right? We have to firstly know how it's structured, right? So normally, like I look at anything, it doesn't matter whether it's more life science. I get life science because it's we are talking about real object, like physical objects, right? So because of that, like because we're talking about like either plants or animals or us, like as human bodies, we have to firstly locate that structure and be able to draw it and label it, right? So here, as you can see, this is the drawing for the male reproductive system, right? And you'll see the testes are the main organ for the reproductive system, right? This is the main sex organ for the male, right? However, these basically these tiny parts, right? They all function to they all function right together to form this male reproductive system, right? So in terms of like how it looks, I like please just be able to draw it, right, and label it like I said. Right. So if we're gonna draw and label it, that's the first thing you need to do. So that's the first level. And then the second level is knowing basically like what happens, right? The process that occurs, right? So let's basically start, right? So do you see, we want to start here. We said basically the testes are the main organs, right? So we start here. Firstly, the scrotum. Do you see that the scrotum basically just protects these testes, is where these testes are, right? Where these balls are. So that's the scrotum, is that it's also skin, right? But it protects this thing. And these testes are outside of the male. Do you see that they are not inside, right? They are outside because they need a temperature that's lower than the normal body temperature, like 2 degrees lower than the body temperature. That's why these testes are outside. And then what you also should know is that when it's hot, right, these testes they go further down, right? To further illustrate that it doesn't really respond well to heat, especially body heat. So when it's hot, it will wanna basically one, because the body, like, it's basically too hot, so it's trying to get away from the body. And then if it's cold, it's going to basically, this scrotum is going to shrink, right, forcing these testes back, right, so that they can grab that heat early. So it has to be at a specific heat, and it will regulate itself, this thing. So that's the first part, which is the scrotum. And then we go to the testes. The testes gets on the basically the main sex organ, mare. Before I explain using this, let's go inside the testes and see what the testes look like inside, right? So the testes, this is like basically a cross section, right, diagram of the testes. So the testes are made out of, so they contain seminiferous tubules, right? So it's these tubes, right? They are called seminiferous tubules, right? And they are lined with these germinal epithelium cells, right? So these are just terms, and these terms you have to know, right? Because they can ask you these terms, right? So, and then some of these cells develop into, so these germinal epithelium cells, what do they produce? The sperm cells, right? And the sperm cells, that's what we want here, right? Do you see that? So that's what we are doing the system for, right? So it produces, so what produces the sperms? The epithelial cells, and these epithelial cells are aligned into these seminiferous tubules, which make up the testes. Do you see? Right? And then some of these cells, they develop into um Sertoli cells, which provide nutrients for the spermatids, right, to become mature sperm cells. So these sperm cells, what does it tell you? It tells you that these sperm cells, when they come from this germinal epithelium, they are still immature, right? And then these um, um, so T cells, right, they make it mature, right? And let me show you something else. So in this case, these testes are gonna, like, I guess the seminiferous tubules are inside. They're gonna, via their germinal epithelium, they're gonna produce the sperm cells, right? The sperm cells are still immature. However, they're gonna line up into this thing, this epididymis. So in this epididymis, they're still immature, but in this stage, like, basically they have those SOTI cells, and those SOTI cells are busy changing them to mature cells, right? So as they tell you here, epididymis, right, it stores spermatids until they mature into sperm cells, right? So these things, these immature cells are called spermatids, right? So these spermatids, they mature into sperm cells, right? I hope you get that one. So the seminiferous tubules, right? The spermatids will come from this, right? And then they will basically be stored into this epididymis, where these Sertoli cells, right, are going to help these spermatids, right, mature into sperm cells while they're still in the epididymis. Ne? So that's basically how this thing starts. And this is another cross section of this tubule, right? There's another cross section of this tubule, but we'll come to that. So now we said these sperm cells are here, right? So what's going to happen? When you are during intercourse, right, these sperm cells are gonna go via this vas deferens. So if ever they ask you about a procedure called a vasectomy, this is why it's called a vasectomy, is because the vas deferens is cut, right? And you see, as a result, if this tube is cut, these sperm cells will not be able to come like this. Do you see? They won't be able to go through this tube. So this is the first difference. What is it? It transfers these sperm cells from the epididymis, right? Right. It transfers basically these sperm cells from the epididymis, right, up to the urethra, right, until the urethra. So that's basically how it goes, right? And then what's going to happen as these sperm cells, so these sperm cells are gonna go up, right, gonna go up via this vast difference, and what's gonna happen when it reaches the urethra, right? You see, do you have these three glands, right? um Seminal, vesicle. We have also um, prostate gland and Cooper gland, right? So these glands you will see here. Here are the functions of these glands. You will see these glands, they basically help the sperm, right, in some way, somehow, maybe help protect it when it's like inside, like for instance, the semi-neutrals, they produce alkaline fluid, right, to neutralize what the vaginal acids. Do you see? It's to protect the sperm from the acid or in the vagina, right? And then it produces what, mucus, that helps with the movement of the sperm. Do you see? So these glands, they produce so it produces nutrient. Do you see? These glands, they produce basically substances that help the sperm cell, right? That help the sperm cell um go more effectively. So it helps it move more effectively, and it also protects the sperm cell, right? So these things, they will give these sperm cells basically a boost, and then these sperm cells during intercourse will go out via the urethra, right? Yeah. And then this is basically the kidney. This yellow thing is the kidney. So when we pee, it comes this side. Do you see? That's why it's basically using the same organ, right? And then that's basically the male reproductive system. Do you see? It's not that long. So that's the male reproductive system. Yeah. And then now we're gonna go to the female reproductive system. So like I said, with life science, you have to know firstly how it looks, and then if you know how it looks, you have to be able to draw it, label it, and then explain the procedure, right? So this is basically how the female organ looks. It's inside, right? Female sex organ is inside. You see, we firstly have these. So the main sex organ for the females is these ovaries, because these ovaries, they are the ones that produce the gametes. The gametes in this case are called egg cells, right? So these ovaries, they are the ones that produce the egg cells, right? And then that's basically the structure of it. Not really gonna go deep into it because I figure you know it by now. So let's just move. So that's basically how it looks, right? That's basically how it looks. If you can just be able to label it, it will be okay. More of the functions of these things will come later, right? So as we are doing puberty, so the menstrual cycle and pregnancy, then I will explain more of these, right? However, for now, just being able to draw it and label it is enough. So let's move on to the next section, which talks about puberty, right? So puberty obviously is the stage at which like humans, right? So or male and females, they mature sexually, right? So you will see things will start to develop, right? So here are some things, here are some examples here that develop when male sex hormone testosterone is produced, right? Female hormones are produced, growth of rare hair around the scrotum, right? Pubic hair. Um, do you see? Growth of hair in the armpits, growth of facial hair. So these things are as a result of this sexual maturity, right? And then we go on. Um, so here it's called gametogenesis. So gametogenesis is just so genesis means production. Yeah. So when they say gametogenesis, it just means that production of gametes, right? Yeah. So you see, production of gametes, right? And then it includes spermatogenesis and um, oogenesis. So Spermatogenesis, obviously, it's for generation of sperms, right? Production of sperm. And oogenesis basically is the production of that egg cell, right? So we start with the production of the sperm, right? How does it actually happen, right? So firstly, you know that it happens in the testes, like I said, right? And where exactly? So germinal epithelium in the seminiferal tubules, right? And then this process, this spermatogenesis is caused by what? The testosterone. So it happens under the influence of testosterone. This is very important. Please note this one down. It happens under the influence of testosterone. And then so basically here they're explaining again um meiosis. So it's fine, you can move on. So here they're explaining okay how it happens under the influence of testosterone. Okay, right, this is just meiosis. And then do you see this is basically the structure of the sperm cell, right? You should also know the structure of it. Like I said, with all the diagrams, you have to know how to draw them and label them. Yeah. Being able to do that like alone will make sure you get like 40 marks, because in most cases it's either going to ask you something to do with the structure itself or labeling it, or being able how to define it. So if you know how to label it, then in most cases like already 40% we taught. So okay, so this is basically the description of these things, right? So here, do you see we have the mitochondria? Mitochondria, obviously, it's for energy, right? It's for energy. Obviously, the head has the nucleus. Nucleus has basically our DNA, right? And then we have the acrosome, right? You see, so the acrosome contains enzymes, right? That dissolve the outer layer, right? So all of these things, this is just labeling. After labeling, obviously, being able to define all of those labels is also important, right? When I say labeling, I don't just mean knowing that this is a mitochondria. It's knowing what a mitochondria does in that thing, right? So knowing that it's a mitochondria and its function, right? That's very important. So in life science, you'll see you have like this is what you're going to have primarily. You're going to have firstly a diagram, right? And labels to label that diagram, right? Because something it happens inside the human body somewhere, right? Whether on a very, very small scale like meiosis and genetics, do you see it's a very, very small, tiny scale, but it does have like diagrammatic like representation. So you have to firstly be able to draw diagrams relating to that, be able to label diagrams relating to that, number two. And when I say label, I mean both label like this and be able to give the function of the label, right? And then secondly, thirdly, which is the last one, know the process of that whole thing, right? How those labels intertwine. Why is it the once you know that, like life science evaluate capacity. So let's move on. You'll see I'll put in emphasis more the label, it's a really drawings in. Then we start oogenesis, right? And let me tell you what when like during reproduction, when the male like releases his like semen, right? The semen has a lot of these cells, right? A lot, right? A lot of these cells. And basically, let's go here, right? It says oogenesis is the production of female gametes, right? So egg cells, right, in the ovaries of a female, right? It occurs when okay, so let's look at this. So it says oogenesis takes place as follows, right? So okay, so the diploid germinal cells, right, of the ovaries, right? So even in ovaries we have these germinal cells. So these germinal cells are the ones that produce these gametes, right? But these gametes, they are produced, so these ovaries, right? The gametes this time is called the ovary, right? So these ovaries um, are, are produced, right? And basically they form many follicles, right? So before these ovaries are there, it goes through this process where you form many follicles, right? And then after every 28 days, right, the follicle stimulating hormone, it will stimulate one follicle. Now, these follicles, right, do you see these things, these follicles, right? These follicles are basically a lower version of the gametes, right? Because um now it's actually the gametes, because this thing must be changed into an egg cell, right? So these follicles, there are many, but every 28 days, this FSH, it will stimulate one follicle, right? And this follicle will enlarge and undergo a process of meiosis, right? It will enlarge and undergo a process of meiosis where out of the four haploid cells, right, produced in the meiosis, the other three will die, right? And then there will be one left, right? One left. The other three will degenerate. That's what they mean. But this that basically means die, right? And then you have this one. Obviously, if you have two and both of them are fertilized, then you're gonna have twins, right? But those twins are not gonna be identical because they're not from the same egg, right? Identical twins, I'll show you basically how you have identical twins. So basically, identical twins is when the sperm and the egg, they fuse, right, to form the zygote. The zygote then multiplies to form, like, to it wants to grow, right, and increase. But after it's like first multiplication, like it splits, right? And then these things, they grow together inside the body. That's how you have like these twins. Mare, in most cases, so in normal cases, you're gonna have one of these, right? Which is going to be fused with one of this, right? One of the sperm cell to form the zygote, right? So here they give you more information about it. Okay, these things is not really something you want to be tested on, so I'm gonna move on. Right. So now I'm gonna go to the menstrual cycle, right? So menstrual cycle is very important, right? Now I think, okay, first the changes in the so it happens for 28 days, right? We know that, right? It begins at puberty and ends menopause, right? So we know with the menstrual cycle, it's made out of two separate cycles, right? That happen, however, at the same time, right? So the first one, we're gonna start with the ovarian cycle, right? Which looks at the ovary itself, right? So the sex cell, the ovary itself. Then the uterine cycle, it looks at the uterus, right? So the lining of the womb. So uterus is the womb. So it's looking at the lining of the womb, how it increases, right? So start with the ovarian cycle. So the ovarian cycle refers to the development and release of an ovum, right? So of an egg cell, like I said, inside the ovary. So it begins what? At day one, when FSH is released, right? So follicle stimulating hormone is the one basically that starts this cycle, right? So it's secreted. So this follicle stimulating hormone is secreted by the pituitary gland, right? Of course, this FSH is transported via the blood because it's still in that endocrine system, right? That's why it's via the blood, not via nerves, it's via the blood, and then because it's a hormone, and then we have this ovarian cycle. So let's explain this ovarian cycle. We said firstly, FSH stimulates the primary follicle into a Graafian follicle, right? So that's what happens, right? Then as the Graafian follicle develops, do you see? So this thing, primary, it'll turn it into a Graafian follicle, right? Like we said here, that's what they meant when they said it enlarges. They said this thing enlarges. Do you remember? They said the follicle stimulating hormone will stimulate the follicle, right? And that follicle will basically enlarge, right? It's going through, basically here it's going through that process of meiosis, right? It's going through this process of meiosis, develops, right? Then it becomes this Graafian follicle until this Graafian follicle. So now it has this ovum inside, right? This one egg cell inside. These the other cells have died, right? Right, degenerated, right? And basically what happens is as the Graafian follicle develops, right, it produces the hormone estrogen, right? Increasing estrogen. So it produces estrogen. So this thing itself, right, it produces a hormone named estrogen, right? Then they said around day 14, the Graafian follicle ruptures. Why does it rupture? Because during this time, it's ovulation stage, right? So ovulation is when this thing, right, the ovum basically escapes the Graafian follicle. That's why it's called the ovulation, because do you see that that ovum is escaping the Graafian follicle, so it's basically ready. Do you see? It's ready for reproduction. That's what it says. So it ruptures and released, called ovulation, right? Ovulation is stimulated by, do you see, all of these things like inside the body? It's like these hormones, they help each other, right? Before something happens, it must be stimulated by something. It can't just happen. Do you see? Like here, for the follicle, the primary follicle to start growing, we had to have that FSH first, the follicle stimulating hormone to stimulate the hormone, right? And as time goes on, this Graafian follicle, it also produces estrogen, right? However, at a certain level, LH is going to be produced, right? Utilizing hormone by the pituitary gland to cause this ovulation, right? Cause this ovulation, so this rupture of the Graafian follicle. Then what happened? Um, so LH basically, which is that's still utilizing hormone, it causes the Graafian follicle to change into a structure called the copious lithium, right? So you'll see this LH, it also not only does it so do you see that this LH basically what it does, it's here to change this Graafian follicle into this copious lithium, right? And also help with ovulation. Mare, ovulation is just something that happens as a result of this LH, but this LH is there to change the structure of the Graafian follicle into the copious luteum. And to do that, the ovum must not be inside the Graafian follicle. That's why the ovum gets out via this process called um, ovulation, right? And then what happens is that this copious luteum, right, is gonna now produce progesterone. Remember, estrogen was produced by this Graafian follicle before, right, this ovulation process, right, which will increase these levels of progesterone in the blood, right? If fertilization doesn't take place, right, the corpus luteum will shrink, right, and stop producing progesterone, right? Now, progesterone basically, if I can explain it, is just a hormone that also helps, like basically, the womb, right, the wall of the uterus to also like you'll see though it helps it to become thick. Also, estrogen has the same effect, right? That's to help you basically house the child inside the womb, right? And then so that's what happens, and the ovum passes down the fallopian tube, right, and enters the uterus and leaves the body through menstruation. So when fertilization doesn't take place, what happens? You go through a process called um, menstruation, right? So in that's we call it basically going through your period, menstruation. So yeah, that's explaining, but from an ovulation point of view, right? Then if it's fertilized, the copious lutein will remain active and still secrete progesterone, like I said, because this progesterone helps increase the or thicken the walls of the uterus, right? That's why the estrogen still will be produced, right? Because um, um, it also helps thicken the walls, right? And these walls have to be thick in the womb because the child is there. It needs something like, it needs, the child needs like nutrients, high levels of nutrients, and it also needs sort of something like a cushion, right, to house the child in. Then we have this uterine cycle. So it's for the uterus wall, right? Like I said, the uterus wall gradually thickens and becomes more vascular, so richly supplied with blood vessels over the day. So it prepares for pregnancy, basically. That's what it means. And then day one, right? So day one, you will see it will correspond um so day one, right? Day one, it's basically you are in your periods here. That's what happens. So the endometrium wall breaks. So this is explaining what happens if let's say you didn't get pregnant, right? This is what's going to happen. Start to shatter. That's why you see blood, right? It's the shattering of this um uterus wall, right? And it lasts for approximately 4 to 7 days, right? Then the endometrium is stimulated by um estrogen to become thick and develop more blood vessels and glands, like I said. Then progesterone stimulates the endometrium to become even thick. Do you see? It happens in preparation of fertilization, right? And then if fertilization doesn't take place, it tears away. So basically, the walls become thinner, they tear away. And how do they tear away? Is via that process called menstruation, right? Yeah. And then that's basically the cycles. I hope you got them there, right? And then hormone control. This one I think it's not really that confusing. It's something that you can do. So I'm not gonna really focus on it. But please tell me if you want me to focus on it. I just wanted to touch on the important things now. Then fertilization and development of zygote to blastocyte, right? So firstly, you know that during intercourse, right? Um, okay, I won't explain what happens in intercourse because you know what happens in intercourse. I'll just explain what happens in fertilization. So what happens in fertilization is that um, the 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 sperm, right, is going to fuse with the egg cell, right? And after fusing with the egg cell, this fusing of the sperm and the egg cell, firstly they fuse here. Before we start, they fuse here in the fallopian tube, right? This is where they fuse. This is where fertilization happens. So this fusing is called fertilization, where they combine to be together, right? It's called fertilization. And then what happens is that after this fertilization happens, so after this thing becomes a zygote, right? What happens is that it's going to divide via a process called mitosis, I mean, yeah, mitosis. So basically growth, right? It's going to grow, right? And then it will produce something called a morula after 72 hours. So after three days, right? And then after 4 days, it's going to produce this thing called the blastocyte. So marula is just a cluster of these cells. And the blastocyte, it has like a hollow shape, right? And then I think at day number 4 or 5, you're gonna have this implantation of the blastocyte. So this blastocyte is going to be embedded basically into the uterus wall, right? So embedded just means that it will be in the uterus wall, and then this is basically where they detect that you are pregnant, right? And then implantation of blastocyte and gestation. So blastocyte moves from the fallopian tube into the uterus where it embeds itself in the endometrium. So endometrium is basically these walls, right, lining the uterus. So it's these walls lining the womb. I mean, yeah, it's this wall, yeah, lining the womb. It's called the endometrium, and it's the wall of the uterus. And then, um, okay, this is they just tell you that how the blastocyte develops, right? The blastocyte sinks deeper into this area, right? And develops the amnion and the carrion, right? So this thing is not really important. Okay, the implantation of the blastocyte is not really important. They're gonna ask you, although this thing, right? The structure they can ask you, right? Like I said, labeling is very important, right? So this process is not really important. This blastocyte gestation, right? It's not okay. Gestation period is just known as pregnancy, right? It's the period value where the um, the embryo is going to develop, right? So they might ask you to try a structure where you have like a fetus, right? And a fetus, you'll start seeing a fetus after 3 months, right? So there's the structures of a fetus. You have to also know these ones, so know how to label what is a fallopian tube, umbilical cord, amniotic fluid, all of those things, right? Normal way. And then okay, this just explains the process of diffusion, right? What's very important to know, and this is very important to note, is that the mother and the child they never share blood, right? They never share blood, right? That's why you can have a child that has a different blood type than you, because the mother's and the child's blood will never mix, right? So what happens is the child obviously gets nutrients via this cord, right? Right, it gets nutrients via these cords, and then even gases via these cords, right? So these things is called I'm talking about the umbilical cord, right? And it has umbilical veins and the umbilical artery, right? Yeah. So and then that's basically it. That's basically it. That's yeah, that's human reproduction. And the next one, for the next one, we're gonna do yeah. So for this one, we're doing DNA. I mean, we're doing human reproduction, and then the next one I'll do the central nervous system. Thank you.